We're just days away from the Trump inauguration, the global economy bracing for some changes. Canada readying some retaliatory tariffs on over $100 billion worth of U.S. goods if the president-elect proceeds with a 25% tariff against Canadian goods. Our Seema Modi's here at Post 9 with a very special guest on that front. Hey, Seema.
Carl, I'm delighted to say we have Canada's Minister of International Trade, Mary Ng. Minister, thank you for joining us here in New York.
Well, it's great to be here, Seema, and I'm looking forward to this conversation with you and Americans.
3 days till President-elect Trump is sworn into office here in the U.S. Big question is around trade. What can you tell us about what Canada is preparing if he does follow through on his tariff threat?
Well, I think what I want to say to Americans is that Canada is the biggest customer to 36 states. Every day, 36 states wake up and say, Canada is our biggest customer, and I think that matters. And the reason that matters is that if you're going to put tariffs on Canada, what it actually will do is it will actually make things more expensive for Americans. It's going to make things more expensive for American families, for American farmers, for American businesses. And if you look at how much trade we do, that's going to really matter, and it's going to matter a lot to Americans.
Well, the cost of business also goes up if Canada retaliates. Are you expecting dollar-to-dollar retaliation, and what's on your list of U.S. goods that could face tariffs from Canada?
Well, everything is going to be on the table. What we have been working on is to make the point to Americans that as your biggest customer, and when we sell 70% of our goods to the USA, you can pretty much be sure that if you're buying something in the supermarket, any of that good, think about a candy bar. There's probably some Canadian in there. So if you're paying $4 today, you might be paying $5 tomorrow. So it really is about the cost to Americans, what it means to American businesses, what it means to American families. You don't want it to be more expensive. So I would say to the Americans, and I would also say to the president, these Trumps don't make good sense for Americans. So why do them?
Is Canada ready to use energy as leverage in this trade negotiation? The thought of an export tax on the Canadian oil and natural gas that comes into the U.S., which would be costly to Americans.
Well, you make a really good point about energy, and there's a lot that's been said about a trade deficit with Canada. But you know what? We sell a lot to America. That is true. We sell energy to America. But if you take away the energy that we sell to America, there's actually a trade surplus. So, in fact, Americans do better in their trade with Canada. And if you take energy out, it is a trade surplus. But I don't actually think Americans want us to not be selling electricity, oil, and gas to America because, you know, I'm here in New York. The lights on Broadway, lots of it is Canadian electricity.
One way to get around the tariffs is you could merge with the U.S. and become the 51st state, as the president-elect has suggested. What do you make of that?
Well, let me put it this way. That isn't going to happen. And I'm more interested in talking to Americans, to the 50 states here, and to say that, look, tariffs are going to be really, really hurtful to American businesses, to American families, to American farmers. And I want Americans to think about those tariffs and just how not good they are for the American economy.
You're speaking on a day where the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has a speech out, and I'll read just a piece. Market tariffs, blanket tariffs, would worsen the cost of living crisis. Retaliation by our trading partners will hit our farmers. The bottom line is this: tariffs are a tax paid by Americans. Are you coordinating with the U.S. Chamber?
Well, I'm glad the U.S. Chamber has come out to say that because that is actually the fact. I mean, when you put tariffs on, they actually impact directly Americans. So I'm glad that the American Chamber is also saying that. But I would also say this. I think we have a very unique opportunity right now for Canada and the United States to build an even stronger economy, a stronger North American economy by working together. I think we've got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do that today, and that's where we should be going. Let's not talk about these tariffs. Let's not do these tariffs. They hurt American families. They hurt American communities. Let's do something together, which is let's build together.
As we see Scott Besson arriving there for his confirmation hearing, which will be taking live. Speaking of the incoming administration, though, there are many who believe that President-elect Trump simply says these things as a negotiating tactic. What do you think the administration, the incoming administration, and led in part by Scott Besson at Treasury, if he gets confirmed, really wants from you guys?
Well, I think that what we know to be true is that Canada is the biggest customer. The United States does really well trading with Canada. I think in the time that we will have done this interview, to give you an order of magnitude, we will have done $20 million in trade in the few short minutes that I have been sitting here between Canada and the United States. And what we should be talking about is how we build a really strong economy.
But if there's a desire for a negotiation on the part of this incoming administration, do you have a sense as to what their ask might be or what you might be willing to meet them on if there's an area of agreement and or contention?
Well, one of the areas that the president talked to Prime Minister about and to our administration about is, working together collaboratively on the border. And we are doing that. We're doing that together. We've now got a strike force going on between Canada and the United States. A secure border is a good and a safe border is good for America. It's good for Canada. We're really looking forward to working with the United States on that. And I think that what we're also trying to do is to build more together, to innovate more together. And the competition is not Canada. What we need to do is we need to do business together to be strong and competitive globally. If you think about it, 70% of what we send down here to the United States is from Canada. So you're making the Made in America includes Canada. And when you make it, you have finished goods. And you don't want to be less competitive. You want to be more competitive. And if you're going to put a tax on that 70% of inputs that come in from Canada, it's just not good for Canadian. It's not good. What? It's going to hurt Canada, but it certainly is going to, to hurt Americans.
It's a balancing act, isn't it? Because depending on how aggressive Canada is, it could also be economically damaging to your country, which, if you look at the latest economic data, GDP is slowing and your party now faces a re-election. That also, I'm sure, is being factored in.
Of course, as the Canadian Trade Minister, I must always look at Canada's economy and what's good for the Canadian people. But this relationship is the envy of the world. This economic trade relationship, I mean, people always say, what is the $1 million question here between Canada and the U.S.? It's not the $1 million question. It's the $1 trillion question. That's what we do together. And Americans benefit when we keep doing this together. But as I said, tariffs hurt American families. They hurt American communities, and I think that that should be the focus.
Let me ask you this: are you already in talks with other countries, learning to figure out how you can diversify your trade partners if this does, in fact, end into a trade? If we enter into some type of trade conflict between the United States and Canada?
Well, I've always had the mandate as Canada's trade minister to diversify. Canada is enviable in that we have, through our own trade agreements, access to almost 70% of the world's economy. I've got trade agreements in the Asia Pacific through the CPTPP, so countries like Japan, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand. I've just negotiated an agreement with the fourth most populous country in the world, in Indonesia. I've got a trade agreement with the Europeans. So Canada does trade everywhere around the world. I do trade missions, and I bring hundreds and hundreds of Canadian businesses to the United States markets, but also to those other markets. So I would say Canada has the skills and the talent in people. We've got the resources. It's really great for us to be doing work with America, but absolutely, we also need to be, pursuing opportunities around the world, and we are.
We should remind viewers, this is not the first go-around we've had on this front. 2018 was an experience for both countries. What would you say Canada learned from that round of negotiations or back and forth regarding tariffs with Trump?
What I think we learned and take away is that we can do this. Remember,
do what?
Well, it is President Trump's agreement in the USMCA, doing this together, finding a common ground. And I think that's where we should be focusing our energy, finding a common ground to build a strong North American economy, something that is already the envy of the world and can be even more. But the learning from that is that we can indeed do it. If we are committed to doing it, we will do it. And I think that for American interests as well as for Canadian interests, that's where our focus should be.
If we see a change in government, we know that Trudeau is still there, but he's outgoing. He announced his resignation. If we see a change in government, do you expect a different approach in dealing with Trump and tariffs?
Canada has had a consensus, and that is that Team Canada really is that. We must do that across the country. We do it at government, at all levels of government, but also with the business community, also with labor groups and other stakeholders. So I think Team Canada will continue to be united because it is about the Canadian relationship with our closest trading partner, the biggest customer to the United States. And, just a point on the biggest customer, we buy more from the Americans than Japan, than China, than the United Kingdom, by far combined. So we, in fact, outsize in that customer relationship. That's how strong this relationship is, and I would say let's keep doing this.
About 70% of Canada's military is procured from the U.S., but your ambassador has said that that is an area where you guys could buy more. What exactly is on the list there? Is it fighter jets, drones?
I think everything's on the table.
You all bring great expertise to the committee, and we look
That's
forward
clear.
to working with
Yes. Minister, we appreciate your time.
Also,
Minister
honored to lead this
Marion
committee
Inga, the
alongside
International Trade
Ranking
Minister
Member
for
Whiting.
Canada. Interesting
Senator
conversation here.
Whiting and I have
Thanks so
a
much. Have me
proven
back.
track
Thank you.
record of
We will.
working together to improve the lives of
Waiting
our
for Scott
constituents
Besson
in
here
the Pacific
to
Northwest
read his
and
opening
on this
statement, and
committee.
then he'll take questions from the Senate
And,
Finance
we can
Committee
and
as
will
part
do
of the
so again in
confirmation
Congress.
hearing.
I look
I mean, look,
forward
we're
to working with you,
expecting
Senator
tariffs
Whiting.
to come up, and we don't know exactly
This
how
committee's jurisdiction,
he's going to feel about tariffs.
tax,
Traditionally,
trade, and
investors,
healthcare policy
hedge fund managers,
reflects
economists
some of
that
the
we
most
speak to
challenging
are
matters that
not really
Congress
pro-tariffs,
confronts.
right? Because the thought is that they're going to
The
hurt
Finance
economic
Committee will
growth,
continue its
raise
long
inflation.
tradition of addressing
But
these
when you're
matters
part of
in
the
a
Trump
manner that
team,
invites
you're for
bipartisanship
tariffs because he
and
clearly views
delivers
this as a
results
necessary
to
tool
create
in terms of
opportunities for
realigning
Americans.
trade, potentially national security. So I am curious how he's going to frame the tariffs, guys, and whether Besson will talk about them as a negotiating tool or a potentially necessary economic tool, just apropos of our conversation here with the Canadian minister. Tariffs and also sanctions. There's been some sanctions fatigue. Treasury oversees sanctions as well. And it gets to this whole question of the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. Countries that are sick of sanctions are trying to move away from the dollar. And I do wonder if this president, President Trump, views tariffs as a more effective way than sanctions, for instance, as he's already threatened that for countries that are trying to diversify away from U.S. dollars.
That'll definitely be a question, given some of the reports even today that sanctions are getting a fresh look, not only as a way to move the Ukraine deal along, but to squeeze Iran, to squeeze Venezuela. We'll listen for questions about Treasury, Fed leadership, dollar strength, Bitcoin. Megan Casella's in D.C. can probably give us a little more color on how you think the tone's going to go today, Megan.
Hey, Carl, that's exactly right. So you can see there on the screen, we're getting started here. It's a packed room, a hearing room, and you can see the opening statements from the top Republican and the top Democrat now. Just getting started.